I'm Lynn Randall, Executive Director of Chesapeake Forum. Welcome so much to coming here. I see a couple faces that I know have been wanting to come to this class for a long time, so I'm very happy to see you. Michaela Foley, thank you so much for doing this for us. I promise not to kibitz. I'm usually the one teaching this, and I'm just exhausted.
I'm in whenever, I'm in whenever you feel like I might have missed something or like something that might be helpful to explain. I'm happy to have that.
Oh, I might, but probably not. And we're going to go around the room and find out a little bit more about you and what your situation is. Like, do you live in an HOA? Do you have a small property, a large property, a wet property? All those kinds of things, and that'll give us some ideas of what to do as the field trip at the end of the class, which is that Friday after all 3 sessions. So with that, I'm turning this over to you.
Okay, well, welcome everybody. It's so wonderful to see you guys, and thanks for joining in on the class. One of the things that I like the most about doing like a multi-class session is that we get to see each other and get to know each other a little bit better, especially over the course of the next couple of weeks. And also, if I forget something today, I can always bring it next time, which I really appreciate. And welcome everybody online. We are going to actually go around, and I would love if you could you can just say your first name, and maybe what brought you to this class, or maybe what you're hoping to get out of this class. That might be a nice little way to kind of get started. So I'm going to start.
My name is Kim. I just moved to Easton in December, so I have a 2-acre plot. I'm a floral designer, and so I created a little cutting garden in my little 2-acre plot, but the rest of it is wide open. And we found for the winter that it was so wet that there were ducks floating in our backyard. And there's places where it's just unbelievably slimy, and places where I created a fence and you dig a hole and the water just seeps in and it doesn't leave. It just sits right there. And other places where it's bone dry, so it's a little bit of everything. And it's a blank slate, and I want to create, lots of flowers.
That's really exciting, a blank slate.
My name is Kate Bird. I live outside of Oxford. We're on the water. There's about 7 acres around the house, but some is literally right on the water. So you get some of the brackish stuff. Sometimes we get standing water after a big rain for a while, but there's a lot of it that is sunny and dry. And so looking to put more perennials in and color throughout the season in areas. So,
Yeah, I'm Kurt. Mary and I live in urban Oxford.
Urban Oxford.
We've got a half-acre lot on the water side. I think you and Mary got in touch with regard to some corporate plannings. I'm also on the steering committee or board or whatever it is for the Friends of Oxford Conservation Park. I know that Posey's talked to you about the front end as well. So those are my 2 interests. But in general, I'm a birder and would like to see more native plants and wildlife-friendly environments.
Wonderful. Well, welcome, Kurt. And yes,
I don't have much to add, except I'm more into like the flower beds and that sort of thing. And just really interested in combining the interest in the birds and the berries and, native plants when and where we can put them and everything.
right. Wonderful. Well, and they will go in naturally, which is good.
Well, Kurt and Mary, we live in the suburbs of Oxford. We're on Road Farm Road, and we're on the water, and we have just moved down here. This is my husband Larry. We moved down here a few years ago, so the pandemic sort of pushed us out here. We fell in love with it, and so we're sort of new to the gardening world, and we've really gotten in deep. So and we love it. We're figuring things out, and I guess the biggest thing, we have started a meadow, and trying to figure out the challenges of that. So that's one thing I want to come away from this class with. And our soil is very clay and high alkaline. So we have the, problems with the challenging soil. But what we're doing, our garden looks beautiful and we just want to make it better. And bringing more native plants in is a goal.
Excellent, glad to hear that. Larry, do you have more to add?
We have the bathtub thing, we dig out a lot of stuff, put it into good soil, but then when you get rain, it still doesn't drain from underneath, so you almost have to figure out another way to get that to drain when you get lots of water.
Absolutely.
I think last year was the first year we didn't overwater everything.
Yeah.
It looks a lot better this year.
Well, that's good. Yeah, no, it does. Yeah, we have plenty of water here, don't we?
Okay, my name's Holly and I'm from Queenstown. I'm on the East White River. We live in the woods.
Okay.
So I really
That's a good
want,
change of pace. That's
yes,
good.
I want to be able to do some native plants in the woods that are good for the water.
Excellent. Glad to hear that.
I'm Trish, and we're also from New St. Michael's. We have a property on Broad Creek, about 5.5 acres. We're building a new home. So we have two things. The first one, a landscape around it and nice. And, but we also have to mitigate like hundreds of plants, trees and plants. So I wanted to go as all at native or as much as I possibly can. And I have no knowledge about this, so I'm here as sort of a beginner and hoping to get a lot of great information.
Oh, good. Well, thank you. Thank you for coming.
Hi, I'm Linda. We live right outside of St. Michael's. We have about 9 acres on Spencer Creek. My husband just last year started bee colonies. He has 14 bee colonies.
You and all in.
So we have 2 fields that we're trying to convert to wildflowers. And I have started like gardening around our house. I mean, it's like overwhelming. And I'm all about native perennials that come back every year. So I want to learn more about the native perennials and what we can do to, help further establish our wildflower garden.
Excellent.
Meadows, I should say.
Okay. So we have white clay, and the other one thing I want to mention is I'd like it to be as kind of maintenance, low maintenance as possible.
Yes.
Okay.
We all want that too. Doesn't always work out, but we all want that too. I appreciate that, absolutely. And so what we're also gonna do, I'm gonna pick on everybody who's online as well, just because you're hiding behind a screen doesn't mean I'm not gonna call on you. So I'm going to kind of call out just the boxes, I see it on the screen up here. Who is T.A. Costa's iPhone? And you can feel free to unmute you're muted right now, but feel free to unmute yourself.
Hi,
Hi, we can hear you now.
good. I'm Karen. I live in East Newmarket on the Choptank River. We have about an acre. A lot of it is landscaped already with a lot of evergreens. I have some roses, 10 or 15. I'd like to do something along a fence line that I have that's relatively new with color and combined with, I seem to be doing okay with the low stuff, but I'm having trouble finding tall stuff to integrate into the low stuff. So that's where I am.
Glad you're thinking about layers, because we will be talking about that. It's not just about stuff growing on the ground, right?
Yeah,
All right, welcome, Karen, thank you. And Jody.
thank you.
Did you say Jody?
I did say Jody. Welcome, Jody.
All right, so we live on the Miles River. We grow moss extremely well. That's not totally what we would like to have. So I'm just interested in native plants. I certainly want color through all the seasons. And I'm also having a pretty bad vole problem, as you well know, Michaela, because I called you about it. And so I need to find something that voles do not like or that will make them go somewhere else.
Well, that's a new one. That's good. That's a good one. We'll talk about that one. I'll do some research too and come back for next week when we talk about it.
I need that too.
Yeah. Okay, goals. All right. How do you know? We'll bring some goal information back to class next week for sure.
And ants.
And ants. Oh well.
They're killing everything.
And so we have Bill next.
Hello, I'm Bill Paseric. I live in Easton. I moved to my current place in October. A lot of the grounds are maintained, but I do have a number of plants in pots on my back porch, which I try to maintain as native plants.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Bill. Welcome.
Thanks.
And then we have Christine.
Hi.
Hi.
So I live in Easton off the Miles River. We live on 5 acres approximately. We have a lot of shade where our home is situated, and we have a lot of different types of ferns, but I'm hoping to try to incorporate some native plants that grow well in the shade. And then just, hopefully have some things also with color rather than just the green of the ferns.
That is fair. So is it pretty wet in that area as well?
It's not wet in that area because our property has a slight slope to it, so it drains down to the water. But we do have some other areas where there aren't a lot of trees that do hold water. And of course, listening to everybody else as well, we have a lot of clay. So you go down not very far when you're digging or trying to plant something, and there's a large quantity of water.
Okay, excellent. Good to know. Just like to prepare myself. All right, welcome, Christine. And then I think our last person is Kimberly. You're muted, Kimberly. Oh, Kim, you're muted. There we go.
There we go.
We can hear you.
I, like everyone else, I have property here in Easton. We have some waterfront. We have a meadow behind the house. We've added a pool, so we're trying to add some native to the critical area. I just really would like to know more about native plants, things that we'll have for a long time that we can manage without having to do too much mulching and all of the care that goes with gardening.
Right.
You'll have some ideas for me.
Here's hoping. Well, we'll discuss. And actually, I want to make that known, is that I like to have my classes be more of a conversation, because me talking at you, I don't get that valuable information that you all just shared with me. So it helps kind of prepare me for conversations, but it also helps other people learn. So also anybody online, feel free to chime in, or if you don't feel comfortable talking out loud, maybe we hit the chat box function, and Trina will let me know when there is something to discuss. Or you can email me directly if you don't feel comfortable doing it in the group setting. Okay? Excellent. Well, we've met everybody. We're all going to be really good friends for the next couple of weeks, right? And it sounds like a lot of us have similar objectives, which I think is a really good way to set us up for this class. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to cover kind of 3 different topic areas, one for each week, but this week we're going to be mostly concentrating on plants for sun and shade. So some of the people talking about shady spots that they're having challenges with. Hopefully we can get some ideas. What I've done, and I apologize for those of you online, I'll be sure to share them afterwards, but there are slides that have a lot of plant lists on them. Don't feel like you need to write them all down. We will send them out as a PDF so that you don't have to think about all the names or try and write them down frantically. And I printed off for everybody who's here in person those same plant lists. Not every slide is on that particular handout, but all of the list of plants is, because I know that I create a lot of lists. I have a lot of ideas and plants that I like to talk about. And you may even notice that there are some plants that hit almost all of those lists. Those are what I call my tried and true plants. They're good things to gamble on if you have a spot that's particularly challenging. There's a good chance that those plants will survive. And survivability is always my favorite because I like to have things thrive despite my involvement or non-involvement. So anything that can kind of survive on its own, we're doing pretty good. But we will go ahead and kind of get started here. And I just bring this slide up real quick because I work for the university. We receive federal funding, and that as part of that federal funding, we are open and available to all people, regardless of background, race, religious beliefs, and just wanted to let you know that equality is very important to us, and we want to make sure that we are reporting back to our federal funders that we do not discriminate.
Do you want us to fill these out?
Yes, I was just gonna get to that. So there is a card at the top of your table. Those of you online, don't worry about this. I will send out a link if you would like to complete it. You do not have to complete this card. Participating in this class is not contingent upon you finishing that card. Basically, it's just to report that I'm reaching a wide variety of audience members. So again, feel free to fill that out if you want, and if not, just leave it at the front of your table and don't sweat it, okay? All right, so I'm going to talk about my background. Who am I and why am I up here talking about native plants today? So my name is Michaela Bowley. I'm a Principal Agent Associate, which is a mouthful, for the University of Maryland Extension. All that means is that university has satellite offices across the state of Maryland in all 23 counties and Baltimore City. And this is sort of my role, is to do public education, to talk to homeowners about problems relating to landscape or horticulture, bugs. I get kind of the gamut of things. And I could write a book about the weird stuff that's walked in my office, which is, I think, really neat. It's a part of my job I really enjoy. But sort of the concentration of where I like to spend my time is on native plants. And so that's where I've kind of developed my expertise and my enthusiasm for this particular topic. And that's sort of a little bit about me and where I come from. I'm located here in Talbot County. Like I said, I work here in the Easton office. So that means all of you who live in Talbot County, I am your local resource. If you want to call me with that weird question about bugs, I'm the gal you talk to, okay? And nothing's too weird. I mean, don't think like, okay, Michaela's gonna think I'm a nut job. No, I've seen it all. It's fine. All right, so here's kind of how we're gonna approach this. Today, we're gonna set the foundation. We're gonna talk about native plants for sun and shade. And then next week, we're gonna be talking more specifically about pollinators, but I will concentrate a little bit more on wildlife in general because I find that pollinators and wildlife, they kind of go hand in hand. And then at the last, we're going to kind of try and bring all this information together and talk about planting for the seasons and why that's important. Now, what I don't have up here is our class field trip day, which I think we're holding June 7th for that. And what I wanted to do real quick is get a survey out to you all who are here today to think about where you might want to go. You know, listening to what you all were saying, I'm wondering if a home property that has native plants in place would be helpful to kind of see that in action, or if you want to look at something that's more of a blank slate. I actually was thinking about the Oxford Conservation Park and those beds that we were looking at, and kind of putting your knowledge to use and get some ideas, like what would you recommend for those areas, that kind of thing. So I can take a survey, or I can send out a survey to you all and get an idea, and majority wins, but we are holding that June 7th date for our field trip. And it will be in Talbot County. I don't, other than Atkins Arboretum, I can't think of anything that would be too far outside of where we are now. Okay? All right, and that goes for everybody online too. I'll send out a survey and try and glean where you would like to spend your time. All right, so let's get started. What we're going to do is we're going to make sure that we know what native means, because that's a term that gets tossed around a lot. And then I want us to think about how we evaluate a site, because that's important. It's not enough just to buy a native plant and just throw it in. More often than not, some things survive, but there's a little bit more to it, more than meets the eye, so to speak. So we're going to talk about soils a little bit. I have a landscape evaluation there that you don't have to fill out right now, okay? Don't frantically try and fill it out. Somebody already tried. You were very eager, and I appreciate that. And then I'm gonna go through some of these plant lists. I brought some samples of things that might be on those lists. And for everybody online, what I'm gonna do is I'm passing these items around, but I also have a microscope set up to the camera. So at the very end, I'm gonna put those samples under the microscope so you guys can kind of see what they look like up close and personal, and we can kind of talk about what we're seeing. All right, so native plants are kind of defined by these three priorities. So they are something that occurs naturally, and it's going to be in an ecoregion and habit. And so our ecoregion here is the Atlantic coastal plain. So it's characterized by the soils that we have here, our proximity to water, and sort of how those soils have developed over the course of time, and how they've developed with other plant communities and insects. That's important too. So that's kind of what we mean when we say ecoregion. And I'll mostly concentrate, I think there's only one thing here that is not native to the coastal plain, but that's primarily where I spend my time talking about plants, because we want things that are going to be able to handle our clay soils, right? So a lot of these things are very well adapted for that. And they are things that have been occurring over the course of evolutionary time. So they've been here and they've been growing here since our recorded history. Or since the colonialists, that's kind of how we benchmark it, is that it's when the colonialists came and started like documenting what they were seeing. And so they've adapted to these physical conditions and they've co-evolved with these other species. And we'll concentrate a lot more next week on that special bond between insects and native plants as well. So a good example I like to use is Queen Anne's lace. So this is technically not a native plant, but it is something that does occur naturally in our ecoregion. It just hasn't been here over the course of time. It was introduced. Same thing with dandelions. And actually, some of these plants serve a good purpose in terms of they might provide for insects or wildlife, but generally, native plants have a higher eco-benefit, is what we call it. So they support more animals, they support more pollinators, and I will pick on non-native plants a lot, and I don't mean to like make anybody feel bad, but I just use it as an example of why native plants are so important in our landscapes. Okay, so and these are one of many reasons to love native plants, but these are just some of the reasons why we take a look at them. They tend to be very adaptable to different environments. So like I said, you may have that kind of soil that is waterlogged, it's clay, it's wet. Guess what? There are native plants that love that. A lot of our other native plants, or a lot of other ornamental plants aren't going to tolerate that. They were brought in and they're used to conditions that are, perfect for them, which would be well draining, full sun, conditions we don't have. The other thing that's really important, and I emphasize this week after week, is how biologically diverse our native plants are and how they support our ecosystem as a whole. So for me, it's not enough to have plants in the landscape that look good. That's great. I like to enjoy them. I like things that bloom. But it also has to serve a purpose because, we're part of the ecosystem. We live here. So it means that we need to give back a little bit, right? So we want to plant things that are supportive of all of those critters and the world around us. So, our backyards can be habitats. They don't have to be just mowed turf, which is more often what we're given when we're given a new property or when we're building a home, is contractors come in, they may put one tree out in the middle of the yard, they plant grass, and that's it. And that's what I call an eco-desert, because there's nothing going on. There's not a lot of life. And so again, wildlife support, a lot of native plants provide habitat and food for their dependents. And less maintenance if they're planned and planted properly, right? If it's a plant in the wrong place, no matter if it's native or not, it's not going to thrive there. So hopefully I will give you some tools to help you in the future making decisions about what to plant and that you will have success so they are lower maintenance. And so, what about non-native plants? Again, I like to pick on non-native plants. It doesn't mean you can't have them in your landscape. I also have them in my landscape. But biodiversity is a key element I'm going to concentrate on. And that means not just a diversity of species, but diversity of layers. So you want things that are low growing to the ground, You want a mix of shrubs and trees. These different layers provide different ecosystem benefits to wildlife and for the eye as well. That's a design point of view as well, is you want the eye to be able to be drawn from top to bottom. If you plant only shrubs in front of your house, that's just kind of a level playing field. It doesn't add much interest other than it's something planted in the front yard. There's a lot of research out there about the perfect mix of native plants and ornamentals, and I think what they've sort of landed on is if you have a composition of about 70% native or more, you have the same benefits as being 100% native. So if you're gonna do anything, try to get it up to a proportion of 70% native to 30% ornamental. And that's kind of like the ideal. Even more natives than that, that's great, but this is sort of like the sweet spot for if you want a mix of those two different things. And again, a lot of non-native plants create food deserts for our insects and our birds. So I like to do a little pop quiz to get everybody thinking this morning. I use certain plants as examples, and I like to pick on crepe myrtles because there's a lot of them. How many species of caterpillar do you think crepe myrtles support in the landscape? It's one. And it's a pest species. So, let's compare it to another tree, a native tree. How about oaks? How many species of caterpillars do you think oak trees, just one, supports? Single oak tree. Let's take a guess. Do you think 50? 100? Try 538. 538 species of caterpillar are supported by oak species, compared to crepe myrtles, which don't occupy quite the same space, but it fills the similar eco role as, being a tree. It supports one, and it's not even a desirable species. Why are caterpillars so important? And we talk about them a lot. Doug Talley has done a lot of studies about caterpillars in the ecosystem because they provide food. They provide food for birds, in particular young birds that are not able to eat and digest those berries and nuts yet. So those soft-bodied insects are really important for the young of birds and other wildlife. So they serve a purpose as being food for other things. So in terms of an eco-web, a lot of our native species provide more. I'll pick on another species, boxwood, also my favorite. How many species of caterpillar do you think boxwood support? You know where I'm going with this, like 0.
What's what kills them?
And actually, the only one I can think of, it's not even really a caterpillar, it's a fly. It's the boxwood leaf miner, and that's also a pest species. So, comparing it to something of a similar size, what about blueberries? So this is a native species, or a native species of blueberries. They do 288 species of caterpillars. They're not even that big, so we can make conscious decisions about what we put in our landscape and how they support things so much more broadly than if we chose a non-native alternative that just doesn't have the same punch. All right, so you get where I'm going with this, but I also like to remind everybody that turf and lawn is technically a non-native species. I think there's like red fescues that sometimes get called native species, but most people don't use those in lawn. Tall pipe fescue is what we usually see, and that is a non-native species. It is also a monoculture, so maintaining lawns is kind of another kind of desert. Although I understand the need for grass, I certainly have my own turf grass, and it's very useful. But there are parts of your yard, and we'll talk about this, I think, coming up. There are parts of your yard where maybe grass isn't even appropriate, or maybe not even growing very well. So it might be good to kind of like sacrifice that spot for a native planting instead. All right, so, but first, before we talk about plants, I like to emphasize how site evaluation is so important and critical. And what I'll do is I'll share it with everybody online. There's a little questionnaire. Now, I sort of use this when I'm thinking about designing landscapes, because I have a little bit of background in landscape design. But it might be helpful for you to go through that and think about your own yard and evaluate your own property. And especially for those of you who are relatively new to the area, and this is your first growing season that you're really starting to explore what's going on, or maybe a spot that hasn't even really been developed yet, but you can kind of evaluate what's happening, the hydrology, things that are going. And now you can fill these out if you want. That maybe that can be like your homework, is to start to think about your personal site and what's going on with it. But you can skip any questions that either don't apply or you just don't know or don't feel like answering. This is totally voluntary, but I do like to get you guys thinking about what kind of soil moisture you're dealing with. So that's usually, dry, wet, and medium moisture. And you may not even know what that soil moisture is truly like until you've gone through a full year. Because it changes each season, right? And so in the summer, in the middle of dead summer, when it's really hot and dry, that's probably not the best time to think about your soil moisture because it's probably dry. So take an average of it. Think about what it's like between spring, summer, and fall. Another thing I like to say is if you know the pH, if anybody's done like a soil test, this can also be really helpful to know because there are certain plant communities that do very well with maybe a higher acidity soil, so like blueberries and azaleas and partridge berry, things that really like those acidic soils. And then salt. So I heard a couple of people talk about shorelines and having shoreline property. So thinking about salt inundation and having that salt water intrusion from those sites, that's also going to be critical because that is a limiting factor when it comes to choosing plant communities. Salt is a hard thing for many plants to grow with, but there's a whole group of plants that are very tolerant to salt and actually do very well performing in those spots. So just things to think about. You can, if you want, dig a little hole, see what kind of soil you've got going on. That's kind of going above and beyond. But you can also go to a soil map online, and I've included the link for this in the back of your handout. This might be another good homework assignment, is to take a look at the soil map survey. You can punch in your address, and what it does is it shows you what kind of parent soil types are existing in your area. And if you click on it, it sort of shows you here, there we go, what your soil horizon looks like. So what kind of soils are you dealing with? Things that are loamy clay tend to be things that are heavier, and so you're going to have more soil moisture retention. Somebody who's in Queenstown. So you may have like a sandier soil, depending on what you do. Oh, you've got problems I wish I had. So I also have a very wet yard, but I dream about having sandy soil someday. So yours is going to be the opposite of everything I talk about.
I'm with her.
Oh, you want to?
I'm in Caroline County and it's like 50%.
So your soil moisture is probably predominantly dry. And so those are kind of the plants you're going to be looking at, right? But the rest of us here in Talbot County, or at least this side of Route 50, going to be characterized by loamy clay, so heavier, a lot of moisture retention. And so those are things to be aware of as we're choosing plants. So your moisture is going to be a little bit on the wetter side, and the soil is also going to be on the heavier side. And this is just something you can do with Google Earth or Google Maps. You can just punch in your address and take a look at your property from the bird's eye view. And start thinking about areas that may be either problematic or areas that you're thinking about maybe doing a project in, or maybe you want to take a look at your meadow and see whether the lines need to change or something. So this is kind of, you can do this, you can print it out and use a pen and use it, or you can just drop it into, SketchUp or something online. So this is where I've circled areas that I tend to use grass most heavily. And those are areas I want to avoid planting a lot of native plants because we use it for recreational purposes. So this, I have kids, they like to run around on the lawn. We have our septic field right here, so I'm probably not ready to tackle planting that quite yet because that's a whole different conversation. So those are areas where you'd want to maybe leave grass. But I have a lot of wet areas and they're easy to identify. So this is an area where I actually have grass that's failing and there's a weed that's coming in instead, and it looks kind of like grass in the summer, but it's very weedy in the winter, so it goes brown. This is an area where actually now I have a rain garden because water gathered there so much, it would be ponding for like days. This is just to get your brain thinking again about areas that might be a good idea to try some experimentation with planting native stuff, or where grass is failing and you want to replace it with something else. So this is your homework for next week, is evaluating your site and getting an idea of where might be some good locations to try planting native things. And this, there's my really wet growth site. This is in winter, where it's pretty much dead and brown. And these are all of the lists that I've included in your handout, except beneficial insects and pollinators, which we're gonna concentrate a lot more on next week. All right, so for coastal and brackish areas, these are saltwater shorelines. These are areas where you're getting saltwater inundation. You're gonna find a very specific group of plants that can tolerate this, okay? So it really depends on how far into the water you're going. So there's something we refer to as mean-high tide or mean-high water. And that's basically sort of a line of delineation where high tides tend to go up to. And this is a line we use when we talk about shoreline plants, because there are plants that are below mean-high water and above mean-high water. So for the most part, we're not planting in the water, we're planting a little bit above it. But almost all of these plants, and you'll notice I tried to give a variety. It's not just all flowering things. There's some shrubs in there. Switchgrass is a good one to have. Salt meadow hay, these are grasses that look a little bit more fine textured, so they make the appearance of the shoreline look more purposeful, I guess is a good word for it. But then I have some flowering things in here too. Some marsh hibiscus, which I'll have a picture of in the next slide. Seaside goldenrod, these are flowering things, so you get some color. Yeah.
I noticed that Spartina alterniflora on the list.
Yes, it's not, and that's mostly just because it's below mean high water, and I usually don't recommend people digging in that area because there might be a special permit that is needed. But if you're working with somebody and you're doing you said you're doing remediation.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, or mitigation, sorry, mitigation. That might be part of that.
Shoreline, where it's 2 tides a day.
Yeah.
You couldn't put it in the cadence.
No, that would be above that high tide, but you're absolutely right. So what we usually recommend is you have alterniflora below mean high water and then the patents above. And they usually go hand in hand, and they're a nice grouping of textures to have. And I think, so yeah, here's some pictures of some of the things that I brought one that's in bloom right now. So this is our native iris. It's called blue flag iris. And this is one that does have some salt tolerance. Now, it doesn't like to be right in the water, but it can handle periodic inundation. So even if it's a little bit upland from mean high tide and you get like a king tide or something that goes really high, this will be able to tolerate that and bounce back pretty well. This also does really well in freshwater sites that are waterlogged. So I'll pass this around. It has a beautiful color. There's not many things that are kind of purple that are native like that. I think it's blooming a little late in the year, actually. Mostly they're done blooming by mid-May. But that one has hung on a little bit.
Mine were late too.
I know, yeah, something about this spring has been funny.
Bacteria were blooming when this was blooming.
Yes, and usually Bacteria blooms after, in my mind. But then we have the 2 grasses that I have on the list. We have the switchgrass on the right, and this is what it looks like in winter. Yeah.
Just to double check, is that the blue flag iris on the list?
Blue flag iris, yes. Yeah. Blue flag iris. Yep. Iris versicolor. Now there is a yellow flag iris that is not native. In fact, it's invasive. So I always like to say, if you have that, this is a great alternative to that. And again, everybody online, I know I'm passing these flowers around, but I will bring them to the microscope, or Trina's trying to wait till you're done. Yeah, we'll wait till we kind of go through. I'll go through the list first. And then this is patents. And I actually love the texture of Spartina patents. It's very fine. It makes actually for a great kind of turf grass alternative because it doesn't get very high. And so it's maybe about 12 to 18 inches, but it doesn't stand upright. It kind of lays over. So it's got a really nice texture to it. Handles salt water really well. And in this particular photo, I believe this is bayberry, so that's also on the list. That's one of the few native evergreen shrubs that can pretty much handle being planted anywhere. I recommend it in a lot of circumstances. It's a very tough plant. So those two combined actually make a really nice, purposeful landscape that is also saltwater resistant or tolerant.
Does that bloom white?
No, you're thinking of high tide bush, which is very similar.
It's a spartina also.
No, it's a shrub. If what I think we're talking about. Yeah, and so it has like fluffy white flowers in the fall. Is that right?
I thought it was a spartina, but maybe I'm wrong.
No, I mean grass flowers are pretty small and they're pretty hard to notice, but there's a lot of things that we could be talking about. So if you have a sample of it, though, bring it in. I'm happy to take a look at it.
Thanks.
And then freshwater and wet sites, actually, even the things that grow in brackish water, they will also handle freshwater. We just tend to recommend them for more brackish sites because there are so few things that kind of tolerate that saltwater inundation. But a lot more variety and species to choose from in freshwater sites. And so you should be able to find a nice variety of different things, different appearances to look for. Cardinal flower won't be in bloom until July, but that is the one that's bright red. Very popular with hummingbirds. If you want to attract hummingbirds and butterflies, that is like one of the #1 plants I recommend, especially for wetter sites. It does prefer to have more sunshine, but it's a very striking flower. It's one of the few things that is that bright of a color in the wild. Joe Pyewees are another one that are very highly recommend if you're looking to attract butterfly activity. This is one I usually recommend in lieu of butterfly bush, the buddleias, which are an invasive shrub that if you have one, that's fine, but maybe think about something else. But we have a lot of ferns that are also really good for wet shade areas. I know someone mentioned they want to get away from ferns, but they are a great option for wet, moist areas where you have a lot of different textures and different colors of greens to work with. Caryxes or sedges are another one that are really, really neat to work with. This is tussock sedge that I brought with me, but we have over 600 species of sedges in Maryland. Or no, I'm sorry. Across the US, there's 600 species of sedges, but we have a lot of them in Maryland. And they look kind of grass-like. You'll notice the leaves will be more grassy, but then they have these flowering heads that add a little bit of cool texture. And they're very sculptural. So that's just one of the few we have.
How tall do they get?
Tussock sedge, it gets to be about 2.5, 3.5 feet tall. Yeah, and it's a bunching sedge, so it creates a very big mound. So it looks like a landscape plant. And I know that's sometimes the look we need to look for, especially when we're talking about being in HOAs or having neighbors that might not be amenable to a lot of native stuff, is we have to look for things that look purposeful in the environment so that we don't receive complaints. But swamp milkweed, which is one I don't have because it's not in bloom yet. But swamp milkweed is the milkweed alternative for wet areas. So I like to say there's a milkweed for every kind of growing condition. We have butterfly weed, which is the orange one. That would be better for drier, sandier sites. Same thing with common milkweed. Common milkweed tends to like really low fertility soils, so roadsides. Can't think of a worse soil than a roadside. That gets a little bit of salt and traction and everything. But then there's swamp milkweed, which really excels in wetter sites. So and it has a very beautiful like rose kind of color to it. There are white cultivars, but honestly, I think the straight species has such a beautiful color. I wouldn't go with white. There's so many other things that bloom white.
I did find that they are not tolerant to a dry soil.
No, they did. They did it. Yeah, they like pretty much.
They came. I planted a pile of them last year, and they're not coming back.
And I'll talk about asters a lot more next week when we talk about pollinators, because asters and goldenrods are power plants for pollinators because they tend to bloom in the fall. But New England aster is one that's very tolerant of a wide variety of growing conditions, even though they kind of prefer medium to wetter soils. I mean, I have it show up in the cracks of my sidewalk, and so there's nothing more dry than that. They don't thrive there, but they will grow just about anywhere.
But Caleb, you talked about these various soil conditions that these plants like. Does it light and sun come into the factor also?
Absolutely, yeah. So, and what I brought with me, and we'll include this in the shared drive just because there's so many people. You'll see a lot of these plants. I put in a list of like maybe 5 to 6 species recommended for different kind of growing conditions. So, ground covers for sunny areas. You'll see a lot of these same plants that I'm kind of talking about. But yes, you're absolutely right. It's really going to be dependent also on light and many of these other factors I wanted to play. But I will maybe I'll just pass this around as an example. Again, I just couldn't print that many off, but we'll include them in our shared file folder so that you have very specific conditions and you can kind of get it narrowed down to like 5 or 6 recommendations.
Because our wet areas tend to be shady.
Yeah, so a lot of sedges and ferns probably, but not exclusively. You know,
But the milkweed would not thrive.
Nope, they would like,
Sun.
and I think I will get to shade, I believe, later on.
That's nice with shade is to look at the leaves of the plants you're putting in. Sometimes those leaves add a lot of variation. Even if you're not getting a lot of blooms, you're getting some interesting coloration, like maybe some lighter green against some dark green, or small leaves or some big leaves.
Like, a good example is lady fern, and I hope I put maidenhair fern on there as well, but both of those have a very fine textured leaf. And the maidenhair fern has a really interesting shade to it. So yeah, sometimes that's how you achieve your interest. It's maybe not necessarily something that's blooming bright pink all season long. It might be something a little bit more subtle. Or just, a lot of variety. Variety is the spice of life. And so that's why I'm gonna try and heuchera, a lot of different colors.
Okay, well, the Joe Highway, wouldn't that do well in their shady, wetter area?
There are some Joe Pye weeds that tolerate shade. They like pretty wet.
That's where mine grow.
Yeah, and they will get very tall though. So in some areas like where there's a ditch, I like to recommend Joe Pye because they get tall, but because they're starting out so much lower in the ditch, they tend to do very well in those conditions.
Do they get taller if they're in the shade? Like
Maybe a little emulation. So the plant's trying to grow to sunlight, maybe a little bit, but I think not too drastically.
I don't think any of mine are more than 18 inches at the tallest. Yeah. And I have them in a flower bed that's in the shade. It gets a little bit of afternoon.
Another one that does surprisingly well in shade. I don't know if I put it on this list or not. It's on a different list. Is sweet spider or Itea virginica, which is actually in bloom right now. This is another great smaller shrub. Pollinators love it. Yeah, it has good smell to it. And it creates a very nice form in like its native habitat. So it has almost like a leaping form that looks very purposeful. So it's a really great landscape plant.
And it gives leaves turn beautiful colors.
The leaves are beautiful colors. So we'll pass that around too. It looks very similar to something called clethra, which is another good one for wet shade, and that will bloom. There's a lot of different varieties between the two different species. There are some that are pink. I think clethra hummingbird is pink, or ruby spice I know is pink.
Like hummingbird, I don't know. That will bloom later. The clethra.
Clethra will bloom later, but it looks very similar to the Itea.
Yeah.
But it's a little bit taller, and it does, well, they both do pretty much shade. But yeah, so the clethra will be a little bit taller. That one I think has a better form, especially when we're talking about landscape plants.
What is this?
Itea virginica. It's probably in those little booklets that I handed out, so the landscape with native plants. Those are
But
awesome.
it blooms like crazy.
It will suffer, but to me, I think of that as free plants. I get to like uproot that one and go plant it over here, so yeah. And that's just how it propagates naturally. Good questions, though. Button bush is another one that's really great for very wet shade. In fact, I think it can handle up to 6 inches of water, like permanently. And it's a real power plant when it comes to providing for pollinators. It's really cool. It's not blooming yet, or I would have brought it. They have, I call them George Jetson kind of looking flowers because they're like round and they look like they're from outer space. They look pretty crazy.
How long do they bloom?
Button bush, not very long. Maybe, it's in July and it's maybe about 2 to 3 weeks and then it's time to bloom. But it handles wet shade very well. Same with elderberry, which is also in bloom. I just couldn't get close enough to want to clip it because it was in the ditch this morning. And the ditch was very wet because we had a lot of rain last night. But elderberry is another one, and elderberry is great because you get a variety of interest over different seasons, which we'll talk about. And the berries provide for over 48 species of birds. So you'll notice a lot of the plants I pick, they tend to have overlapping aesthetics. So not only do they bloom and they grow in these kind of troublesome spots, but they have seasonal interests, they provide for wildlife. So, multi-layered kind of plants. They don't have just one function. I like multifunctional kind of landscapes. Sweet bay magnolia is also in bloom right now, and that is a tree that handles just about any growing condition you can throw at it, including wet to dry. It will grow in shade, but it might not flower as much in the shade. It definitely prefers full sun. So yeah, a lot of great specimens here.
It's a really pretty tree too.
Yeah. Oh, so here we go. I did have a picture of it. So this is the button bush. It looks alien, but when it blooms, it is covered. I like to take video clips of things in bloom, and you'll notice that every single flower will be covered in some kind of insect that is attracted, either pollinating it or just feeding for the sake of feeding. It's great for butterflies. So again, this is a great alternative to butterfly bush if you need to have one. This is the marsh hibiscus. It will also grow in freshwater sites. But it's just beautiful. It's like a plate-sized flower. It doesn't look like it should be native here. It looks like it should be native to like Florida because of how tropical it looks. Really an outstanding plant. It does get quite big to the point where it almost looks like a shrub. But it's great for shorelines. So as you're thinking about your shoreline, this is something definitely to include. And then this is another wet-loving plant that will handle up to part shade. It's called ironweed. And it's got these really violet purple flowers, very attractive for pollinators as well. Oh, and here's the carrot stricta, the tussock sedge that I sent around to you. It's got a very nice texture. It looks a lot like grass, but a lot more orderly than maybe just not mowing, right? Okay, for dry, sunny meadow areas. So these ones I would, specifically stay in the sun with, but these are for our dry soil folks. So Trina and Holly, you guys have your sandy soils. These are great recommendations. And I think I don't have, penstemon. So penstemon digitalis does really well in dry, sunny areas. You'll actually notice this blooming just outside in the parking lot. As well as the itea. The itea is somewhere out front in the front of the building. So if you want to look at the shrub in the landscape, just go look out front. But here's the penstemon digitalis, which is a great plant for drier conditions, but it will also handle kind of like wet and moist soils as well. This is a very multifunctional plant. And they call it beard tongue because if you look into the flowers, you'll notice the flowers have hairs on them. And that's just because they're trying to attract and kind of capture bees when they come to pollinate these and try and wipe their pollen off on the bees. So it's a really interesting function that they've developed. All right, and I like So grasses, native grasses are some of my favorite plants in the universe. Unfortunately, right now, they're just sort of getting started. There is little blue stem out in the front garden as well, where the sign for the Y is. Go take a look, because little blue stem is like the grass I recommend for people who don't like grasses. Because they look very orderly, they have beautiful color. In the fall, they'll turn like red and orange. They'll have these white fluffy seed heads.
They're slow coming up.
They are slow coming up. Yeah, they need heat. A lot of our native grasses want heat. And, well, I think we've had heat already. The grasses obviously don't because they haven't really jumped up yet.
And what I'm finding is that where I planted them, they've been overrun by other things that come up earlier. So
Right.
to make sure if you plant grasses like that, you give them plenty of space away from other things.
And blue stem is a grass that stays pretty upright. It has really good upright habit, we call it. Because there are some grasses that have a floppy habit. So it means like, as they start to develop seed heads and as they get kind of tired, they fall out in the middle, they kind of flop over. Not little blue stem. Little blue stem will stay tall and strong, which is, I
It's a
really
great
like.
architectural element.
Yes. Same with broom sedge. I think that's a very underutilized plant, although most people probably look at it and think it looks a little scrubby. But it's a grass that you see in the landscape in the middle of winter. It's like an orange bronzy color. That's mostly why I like to grow it, is because it adds that color in the landscape when we have a really dreary season. So I don't cut back anything in the winter because it adds a lot of interest. But that's something I'll talk about when we talk about seasonality. And there's our, oops, you can do that. So here's our butterfly weed, that's the orange milkweed. And the reason we emphasize milkweed so much is you probably already know, this is a host plant for the monarch butterfly caterpillar. Now, they need the milkweed plants in order to lay their eggs. Their larva is only able to feed on these specific groups of plants, which is interesting because the sap of milkweed is pretty toxic to almost everything else. But the butterflies themselves can feed on other things. So that's why it's so important, not just to have the milkweed, but to have other plants that will attract the butterflies as well. Because the butterflies, the adults, still need to feed on other things. And so when this isn't in bloom, it's harder for them to find. So again, when we talk about seasonality, we'll emphasize that point of having things blooming across all seasons so that you can bring those insects in, you can bring those animals in. I love this plant, and I'm so jealous of sandy soils because that's pretty much the only place where this will grow. It's horseman, spotted horseman. And it's just the funkiest looking flower. These actually aren't flower petals, although they are very vivid, like purple pink. But the flowers themselves are these weird looking hooked kind of flowers, and they're yellow, they look like bananas. They're like yellow with brown spots on them. Very cool plants. This is another plant that will grow really well in dry, actually both of these will. So we have Coreopsis lanceolata, so lance leaf Coreopsis. This is a great one, a nice yellow flower that blooms this time of year, maybe 2 to 3 feet tall. Great for sunny, drier areas, and this is Achillea millefolium. So this is yarrow, and we have a native yarrow to Maryland. Unfortunately, it's mostly not native to the coastal plain, but if you have dry, sandier soils, this would be a great thing to put on your property. And it's got really pretty foliage, it's like very fern-like, so even the foliage itself is very attractive.
It's nice because it spreads out.
It does.
Gives you more and more and more.
And there's a lot of different varieties of that, although our straight species, which is what, to me, there's no name in quotations, it's just the natural species, is just white.
Is this whole category just for sandy soil?
No, I mean, yarrow might grow in medium soils or like loamy soils. I have it in a raised bed right now, so it does just fine. It doesn't mean it has to have sandy soil. It's okay to push the boundaries. Sometimes, you never know till you plant something and you see if it works or not. Now I know the Coreopsis will handle drier clay soils as long as they're not too waterlogged. And here are the two grasses I just mentioned right next to one another. This is the broom sedge. So this is, I believe this was taken in October or November. So this is more of a golden color, and then you'll see This little blue stem, it just has great form on it, doesn't it? So it's more of the reddish color here, and it's much more upright than anything else. It stays very upright.
During the season though, when, before it turns color, it's a really pretty, grayish green. This stands out in your landscape.
Yes, it's got steely blue foliage during the
Yes.
summer, which is also very attractive. And I'm sorry, I know we're running over time a little bit, and that's just because we did introductions and things. So I am going to.
Fine, we have till 2:30.
Oh, I have it till 2:30. Okay, perfect. All right. So when it comes to ground covers, so we get a lot of requests for ground covers because people are either interested in having something like a living mulch, or you're trying to replace turf grass with something that's of a similar size. Now, plain leaf pussy toes, I didn't bring them with me, but I do have them. I'm gonna bring them next time because they're a really cool plant that's done blooming now, but they stay very low to the earth, and they have kind of whitish undersides. Golden groundsel is something I recommend for people who are competing with invasive plants. So there are, and I haven't covered this yet, there are certain levels of aggressivity of certain native plants, so some things that may be more aggressive than others. Some people might call that invasive, but we don't want to confuse that with invasive plants, which are very different. So golden groundsel, it can be very aggressive. So you want to make sure that it's planted in a spot you're okay with it kind of running rampant, that you're okay with it competing with other things. This is something I recommend for people who deal with like Japanese stiltgrass, which is a bad invasive grass that populates wet woods. So golden groundsel is great for wet shade and tint.
And it does okay in the sun too.
It does okay in this. It actually does everything. It grows dry to wet, sun to shade. It just kind of does everything. And this will bloom quite early in the season, maybe like March, early April.
Like the first thing to bloom.
How tall does it get?
Not tall. So the flower stalks get maybe, 2 feet tall. But the foliage itself stays pretty low to the ground. So maybe less than a foot, the foliage. But again, you have to be prepared for the fact it's going to spread a little bit. It likes to spread out. Wild ginger is also a great ground cover that is not as aggressive. It will spread slowly, which is what most people want when it comes to ground covers, because you're trying to cover the ground, right? But yeah, there's a lot of different options. Blue-eyed grass is one that's just finishing really blooming up. It looks like a grass, but it's actually a very tiny iris. And they are similar color to the blue flag iris, so it's like a violet purple with a yellow eye or a yellow center.
When you buy them, you're buying a single one and it goes like this, but when, after a year or two, it's like a big pack of it. It's just interesting to see.
So you can actually do, just like normal irises that are normal irises, bigger irises, you can actually divide them up and replant them in areas and really start to fill in an area. They're a really versatile little plant and they don't get much more than, 12 inches tall. Not very tall at all. And lyre-leaf sage is another one that tends to be a little bit more on the aggressive side, but is adaptable to a very wide variety of growing conditions. I like to tell people, if you're having trouble growing something in a certain spot, put in lyre-leaf sage, it'll live. I promise you, it's pretty hardy. If it's gone to seed, it does throw up a purple flower stalk. And if you wanted to avoid it spreading, I would just cut the flower stalk off before it goes to seed, and that will help contain the spread.
Does your rabbit eat it?
No, because it's in the mint family, and things like deer and rabbits tend to stay away from that. But I can't promise, because if they're hungry enough, they'll try to. I thought I did, but it might be later.
Yeah, you have ginger and.
And you know what? What I will also do is I can send around these different handouts I have for different growing conditions, so you guys can check them out. But Festuca rubra, which is red fescue, that is sort of a native turf grass. So that's something that will get thrown into like a shady lawn mix. But you can grow it just as its own species and not really have to cut it, because the red fescues don't get very tall. They maybe get 12 inches tall, maybe less than that. And so it will kind of like fall over, so it'll be more of like a sweepy look. But it's really good for clay soils. clay soils and part shade is what I like to use red fescues for. And there's the heuchera that you mentioned earlier. That one just finished growing or blooming for me. But heuchera has the attractive foliage, so even though it's done flowering, it'll continue to have some interest to it for the growing season. And so here's the wild ginger, which is, we call it semi-evergreen. All that means is it doesn't really die back in the winter. It tends to stay green throughout the growing season. So that's a kind of nice bonus to it, is that it won't die back and you aren't left with just like brown. Here's the plantain pussy toes, and they're these really cute little white fuzzy flowers that come up on little flower stalks. But even the foliage is really tight to the ground. It's very low. And then here's the blue-eyed grasses, or the little irises. They're very cute as well.
Can I just ask about mine are all dying, and I don't understand what is going on with them. I got dry shade.
Okay.
Some areas get a little bit more intense sun, and that's it moves on. Does it have to be complete shade?
There are some, it might depend on what symptoms you're seeing too. If you're seeing like the edges of the leaves crisp up and stuff, it's probably too much sun. Or salt damage, or something that's making it dry out.
There are some varieties that you get, that you'll see in the nurseries though, that like sun. So you might want to look for some of those, like the ones that are more orangish color. Some of those are sun tolerant.
All right, and so for dry shade, and dry shade is quite a challenge in and of itself. And I believe I have. There we go. Pass those around. I might have enough of those. If you guys all want to take one, you can feel free to. Yeah, I can. Yeah, we can.
Is there somebody you can share?
What's that? So yeah, there's its own challenge being in dry shade, and so this is my kind of tried and true list that I like to recommend for that. A lot of these are low growing. I'm trying to think if there's nothing above, white snakeroot will it says it gets up to 5 feet. I've never seen them that tall. So 3 feet, maybe max is a lot of these. And I did bring, I don't know if this is included on the list, but it will grow in dry shade. So this is our, it's called Calycanthus florida, but I'm trying to remember, what's the common name? Help me along. Yeah, it's not spice bush, but it's like sweet spice or something. It has these wonderful dark maroon flowers. It's really gorgeous, and it does well as an understory tree, so it does really well in dry shade. It also suckers. Now it has a smell to it, but I don't know if everybody will find it palatable. So just warning, don't really stick your nose in it. It's called Calycanthus. It might be. Oh, interesting. Yeah, it's kind of a spicy smell to it. No, it's not spice bush because that's Lindera. Shoot, I'm gonna have to look it up. I'm sorry. And the reason we talk, or you'll hear me say two different names. I'll say a scientific name and a common name. And the reason I tend to go with the scientific name is because I know exactly what species and specimen I'm talking about. If I use a common name, that could be regional. It could be different out west than it is here. People have different names for different plants. But when we use the scientific names, that is the specific plant I'm talking about. So I apologize if I...
What was that scientific name?
Calycanthus, so C-A-L-Y campus.
Oh, she got it. What's the saying is the common name?
Calycanthus.
Oh, that's what it's called?
Yeah.
Now I feel like an idiot. So sometimes its common name is also the scientific name. There you go. But another thing, a lot of goldenrods, we think of goldenrod and we think sunny, dry places. But again, we have a lot of different species of goldenrods in Maryland. And so I like to say there's a goldenrod for every kind of growing condition. So for very shady areas or dry areas, Reef goldenrod is my favorite. And it's also not very big. It gets, I don't know, it says 3 feet. I say 2 feet. And this is one that will grow under shade trees, so it'll grow in the woods, it'll grow in the forest. And again, those goldenrods are really critical because they are late season pollen sources for a lot of our insects. So shade is no excuse. Everybody should have a goldenrod somewhere. And if you guys get anything out of this class, is I want you to plant a native grass and a goldenrod. Those are my two goals. There's also zigzag goldenrod, which I don't grow, but it, just like its name implies, the stem is very zigzaggy. It's kind of an attractive plant. Here's a picture of golden Alexanders, which is a plant. Its leaves look a lot like hellebores, actually. They're very kind of thick. They're very dark green. That's a plant that will grow in a variety of growing conditions as well. The only thing I've really never seen it grow in is heavy wet. It'll tolerate moist soils though, so moist, dry, full sun, full shade. Aggressive too. It can be. It self-seeds, but they're pretty beautiful. And again, anything that self-seeds aggressively, I just cut the flower head off before it goes to seed, and then it won't spread. And here's the white wood aster, and this is a great one for shade. This one is also quite aggressive and will spread. Again, if you just cut off the flower after it's done blooming, it shouldn't be a problem.
Is that an aster that you can do a cut here in like June?
Oh, like the Chelsea trunk?
Yeah.
Yeah, you can, although this one doesn't get too big. It doesn't get too tall. None of these shade plants get too tall, if I remember correctly. But like we were talking about the New England aster, that one does get tall.
Yeah.
Right, it gets super tall, so that might be a good one. Because it blooms so late in the season, you might be able to kind of cut it, I say cut a third off in like June, and then it'll be a much smaller, kind of bushier plant. And there is the wreath goldenrod. It's beautiful. It's a beautiful little plant. I really love it. And then this is a tiarella. And this is one you'll see at commercial nurseries pretty easily because there's a lot of varieties of it. And so those different varieties will have different colors on the leaves, they'll have different shapes. But in the spring it has these cute little white flower stalks.
This is the foam flower.
Yeah, foam flower. So it crawls across the ground. This is great for planting like underneath trees where tree roots are kind of an issue. So it's kind of like a living mulch sort of plant. So it's really great for that. And then, so for shade, oh, I did include it. Okay, so northern maidenhair. This is great for a shady, moist situation. So you were asking about shady and wet earlier. This is your list. So you'll see the wild gingers on that list. Virginia bluebells, which I have a picture of later. Virginia bluebells and golden groundsel planted together make a really stunning spring display because they both bloom about the same time, and it's like a yellow and a blue color together. They both do really well in shady, wet areas. A lot of ferns will do well, of course. Cinnamon fern might be one of my favorites because it makes me feel like I'm in Jurassic Park. I don't know, it's just very cool. It seems very ancient, and it just has a lot of good texture. And if you can get them to grow tall, it makes you feel like, I don't know, like you're in Jurassic Park. But a lot of cool things. So even though it's good to have blooming things, don't be afraid of going with sort of a green palette as well. There's a lot of value to that. Here's that maidenhair fern. You'll notice it's kind of got like a horseshoe sort of pattern on the stem. And it's just got a really nice texture. You can't see it probably from where you're sitting, but the stems are actually black. So it's very, very striking plant. Let me think. Spiderwort is on the left. That's another one that's probably just finished blooming. Very nice violet color. But there's also, the foliage of this is very cool. It does look very spidery. It's very sharp and it's kind of a coarse texture. And then great blue lobelia. That's another great one that has color for the shade. Very similar in color to this, but it will grow on a single stalk. So it's a single flowering stalk. So I mentioned cardinal flower earlier. That's better for wet, sunny areas. Great blue lobelia is better for shady, wet areas. So they don't usually get planted together. And then you'll notice I mentioned golden ragwort again up here. That's one of those plants you'll see a lot of. Oh, here we go. Here's my picture of, this is the bluebells and the golden groundsel planted together. This is actually at Adkins Arboretum. And as you can kind of tell, this is pretty early spring. This is probably early April, maybe late March. And it's growing along a stream bed because both of them like having wetter feet. But it just, they look really nice planted together. It's a good example of planting and pairing things together.
Michaela, I was thinking, since you just mentioned Atkins, some of the people that are new to this area may not know about, Atkins Arboretum does native plant sales several times a year. If you get on their mailing list, and I know I'm going to pick some up on Friday. And you can do everything online, pay for it, and then you set up a time to go pick it up. They'll give you some options, and they'll even help you load your cart.
And I'm glad you brought that up, because even though I'm technically not supposed to endorse anyone business.
I figured. I can.
Said you're not. But you know, that's another thing, is I know we get enthusiastic, we learn about all these native plants, and then the first question is, well, where do I get them? And because they're really hard to find at commercial nurseries. Now, the good news is there's a native plant bill that just got passed late last year, and so we're hoping that means we'll see more native plants at commercial nurseries. But for the time being, there's actually quite a few native plant specific nurseries, and Atkins Arboretum is one of them.
What's the one that's out towards Chestertown?
Unity Nursery, they're another one that's sourced nearby.
What's really nice with Unity is you can buy plugs. They're a ton easier to get in your place soil.
And you know, maybe I can include in a follow-up to today, there's a list you can find on the Maryland Native Plant Society website that lists all the vendors across the Mid-Atlantic that sell native plants. And they'll tell you whether it's wholesale or retail, but most of them are retail. Chesapeake Natives is another one, it's a little bit further away, it's in Upper Marlboro, I think. But it's worth, if you're going over there, it's worth a visit. It's
Why
beautiful.
don't the commercial nurseries carry native plants?
They are
more than they have been.
I'd say it's the demand.
Yeah. When I first moved here, it was very difficult to find native plants, but I'm noticing more and more and more. But you kind of, they're not always good about putting them together.
Right.
But you, as long as you're looking at the labels and you're looking at the species name, you can find them.
And I don't know if everybody online could hear that question, but she asked about why don't we see native stuff at the nurseries? And the short answer is there just hasn't been the demand for it necessarily. We have an industry that was sort of built on growing and supplying things that landscapers have used or that we normally put in. I think the more demand that people like us have of the nurseries asking for these things will prompt them to start to supply them. And certainly this native plant bill, I'm hopeful, that means that we'll see a little bit more. There will be a little bit more of an incentive to supply them to people. But we're lucky that we do have some local resources. Environmental Concern, even though they're not in business right now, they're going to reopen their nursery soon. Well, soon, I don't know when that will be, but we will have another source up here on the Eastern Shore.
Oh, Michaela, I wanted to mention John Ayton Nursery, if anybody knows that.
Yes.
State Nursery. So for trees and shrubs, and they mail them to you. And
John Ayton?
John Ayton.
It's the Maryland DNR State Forestry Nursery.
Very cheap. Well, they look like sticks when you get them, but they have grown immensely.
How do you spell that, Ayton?
Ayton, State Nursery. It's in Preston, but you have to go online and, you know, when is it that they?
You can't go there?
No, you can't go there. So it's kind of a weird period. So I think you have to place your order in the fall.
And right away, because they sell out.
They do sell out very quickly, and then they ship them in the spring. And that's when they're supposed to, yeah. Now, those are 1 year whips, which means they're saplings, so they're very small. But if you have mitigation area, you might want to look into that because they may have to be a certain size for mitigation. Now that I think about it, certain trees, but shrubs should be able to count those 1 year sapling. And the price has gone up, but it's still pretty cheap. I think it's still like $3 a whip. And it's like a minimum order of 25. Yeah. So that's a nice resource as well.
Thanks for mentioning that.
Yeah, and we call it a tree league when you're building, you have to have, you know, so many plants, yeah, so.
So again, these are the plants that you'll notice will come up on a lot, and we can just pass them around if you want. There's a lot of different lists, so I don't want you to be overwhelmed, but if you see something, feel free to take it. There's just different lists for different growing conditions, so there's like dry shade, moist shade, moist sun, there's all sorts of stuff. But you'll notice that a lot of these plants are repeats on these lists, and that's because they just tend to be very tough, and they tend to show up in a lot of different environments. So if you're having trouble with an area, like you've been planting before, and nothing has seemed to grow, maybe you want to try one of these. Maybe there would be some, but if you keep throwing things into the ground without doing like a soil test first or a site evaluation, you might want to go back to that step before investing in a lot of plants and money. And in fact, I didn't really cover it too in depth, but a soil test can be very helpful and very telling. And usually what we tell our volunteers when they go through training is your first step should be a soil test, especially if you're going to be doing a larger project where you're going to be investing a lot of money in plant material. Because you can buy a $50 or $100 tree and put it in the $20 hole is what we call it. But it's you want to invest and make sure that you've got the right soil conditions for whatever it is you're buying.
You might need to do the soil test in different parts of your property too.
Yes.
So it's not, we all have microcosms around our homes, especially those.
Microclimates, yeah, different microclimates. So, but it does cost money to do that. So I normally don't belabor it, but if you're really interested in getting a soil test done, I'm happy to help someone walk through that process. I do think it's really valuable, especially if you're working with a little bit bigger piece of property. It just gives you a lot more information to go with. It gives you pH, it gives you some of the macronutrients, some of the micronutrients as well, sodium. So it'll tell you if sodium is an issue in that particular area. It also will tell you the organic matter content, which should be 2% or bigger. But there are some native plants that thrive in low fertility sites, so it may not be a ton of organic matter. But anyways, so I didn't want to go on that too much. Let me see what else. But if you find yourself reeling about all the information I've been talking to you about today, I'm here to tell you, don't be so overwhelmed, but it may also be beneficial to consider what we call a Baywise consultation. So this is where our Master Gardener Volunteer program kind of comes into play. We have teams of volunteers who are trained to deliver these consultations on private sites, consultations. And we use the Maryland Yardstick, it's called, as kind of a guideline. These are just best management practices. And but what we do is we just work with homeowners to try and address some of the questions and issues that you're facing. So if you're looking at all these plant lists and you're like, I still don't even know what to do, this is where a team can come out and be able to tell you different recommendations of plants that we would put in given the sites that we see.
And they give you a written report.
Yes. You can sign up either with me today, or you can email me and let me know you're interested. In fact, Jody has been one of our Baywise consultation recipients before, and so have you, Lynn. I don't think I went on your visit. I don't think. But what happens is our team comes with a folder, and it just has more information. In fact, it has information about soil testing in it. And then we do a site report and we get it to you within, 2 weeks, so that you don't have to write everything down. And sometimes it's just helpful to have outside perspective come onto the property and tell you what they're seeing. So if you're interested in that, I think I did bring a sign up with me.
I have a question about that.
Yeah.
Do you do a mapping exercise with, like, if we go do our homework and we go online and we're looking at our soil, the analysis you give us on the soil, the aerial.
Yeah.
And then we have that when you come, when your volunteer comes,
Do you do a mapping exercise, like to like kind of draw out versus just lists of plants? Or
Yeah, we might, depending on what we're seeing,
Okay.
yeah, like I might circle
sketch it out?
the wet areas, or I might
Yeah.
like circle an area and say, this is where I would put a rain garden, so I would refer to the
And
rain
then
garden.
I go to the list of
Yeah.
rain.
And actually, one of the exercises we do with our teams is that this very thing, is we look at the soil map first, and then we look at the aerial map and see kind of if there's any hydrology we should be aware of, or where you might have a lot of forest, or where's open areas, things like that. So
Okay.
that would just be a step beyond, so yeah, we could come maybe a little better prepared. But if you're interested, you don't have to be, this is a free service, but I can't promise that we're gonna be able to come out like tomorrow. You may have to coordinate with us a little bit, but feel free Friday next week, maybe Friday. And that goes for everybody online as well. And if you're interested, feel free to email me, and we'll try and get some teams set up to do some visits. And now our teams only really serve
Can we
Talbot
keep
County.
the down, because the people online aren't gonna be out here.
Even though we serve Talbot County, we can probably jump over the border and take a visit in Queenstown, you know what I mean?
We may skip. Do we have, like, with me in Caroline County, would I have somebody in our extension office?
You know what, unfortunately not, but that doesn't mean I wouldn't come and visit you, Teresa, if you wanted. We have done occasional, site visits in Caroline County.
Okay.
I'm sorry, Kurt, good question.
This is kind of an off-the-wall question, but we talk about insects, you know, birder love insects, insects love me. Is there any way to sort of distinguish between biting insects and insects that, because it is a problem sitting in the backyard and everything bites.
Yeah, so are you wondering like,
Well, in
what
terms-
plants would it?
Yeah, is there any way to sort of get a handle on that? I imagine it's very complicated.
It's it is sort of complicated, and what I would say is that hydrology and moisture is probably more of an issue than the plants themselves. But that being said, some people have used plants to help soak up that moisture on the ground and may help reduce it. But I'll share with you the experiment I'm doing this year, which is, I call it the Doug Talmy mosquito bucket deck.
I'm doing the
Are
very
you
same
too?
thing. I am.
Okay, so, and I'll send instructions to everybody, because it's curious, is where you use like a 5-gallon bucket, and you put in like hay or some kind of organic matter, so grass clippings or leaves, that works too. And then you fill the bucket about halfway up, and you let it kind of slurry for a couple of days, so it gets nice and nasty, because gravid insects or mosquitoes, are attracted to that kind of nastiness.
And it pushes
Right.
out carbon dioxide.
Yes.
Which is what attracts the mosquitoes to you, because you're breathing out carbon dioxide.
So it attracts them, and then after like 2 to 3 days, you put in what's called a mosquito dump, which is a bacteria.
And you don't have to use the whole one, because
No,
the
no.
whole one is for 1,000 gallons.
That's right. I use a quart. I
do too.
Okay, perfect. So we're gonna have to cross-reference our notes. And so you put that mosquito dump in there, and then it should be good for I think 3 to 4 weeks. And what happens is that mosquito dump you put in there kills the larva of the mosquitoes. So they've already laid their eggs, or they're attracted to it, and they lay their eggs, but the eggs never develop. So I've heard that helps reduce mosquito
Because
populations.
it cuts the population,
Yeah, it's way down.
Yeah, no, I'm using 3.
Okay, I'm using 2 right now,
Doing
but
it in different parts of the yard, but I was listening to some master gardeners talk about it at one of their presentations, and I thought, I know, it's talked about that, I should try it, so
Yeah,
I am.
I have like a little swamp right underneath my deck, and it just sits, the water just sits there. Can I put mosquito dump in there?
Sure.
And that's
That's perfect. And so even though the mosquito dumps, you can find them pretty much anywhere.
I have
phosphorus.
everything I needed on Amazon,
Yeah,
including a pretty cool lid, so that animals don't go in there and try and lick it up.
And what is this thing called?
The dunks?
No, the process.
Oh, I call it mosquito bucket of doom, but I don't think that's the technical term. I'll share it. Well, yeah, I'll send
Yeah,
it.
so we can send that out to everybody.
Yeah, but that's kind of like a non-chemical way to approach, because, spraying for mosquitoes, you have to kill, I think, 90% or more of the population in order for it to be effective. And well, mosquito sprays do I think it's less than 50%, so.
And they also affect other bugs.
Right.
But I was gonna say for birding, I remember, I have a video that was done of a woman that Tommy knows who focused in on what birds did she want to attract, and then what do they eat. And then they found the shrubs and the trees and plants that drew the bugs that those birds wanted. So you can do this in a backwards way too.
Right.
It takes a lot of studying, and you have to really be vigilant about looking at all of it.
Yeah, the martins and the swallows, the bats, although that's harder to attract from the birds, but, I agree, I think with a more complete ecosystem, you'll find it helps control some of those pest populations.
The problem,
Doesn't eliminate them.
the problem I've run into, and Doug Tommy talks about this a lot too, is that as I built up my native plant gardening, I attracted a lot more birds that are nesting in my yard. And as a result, I'm not seeing as many butterflies because they're eating the larvae. Yeah.
Which is okay, that's kind of, part of the purpose, but, Trina.
I just want to let you know, we've got, I've got in the chat that Bill is interested in a site visit too, so if there's some way that we can get the Zoom people.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll send out an email to everybody and kind of reiterate some of the things we covered. Do you say Bill? Bill, okay. I'll email you, Bill.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
So that's one of the methods. The nice thing about those mosquito dumps is the BT, the bacterium will not affect non-target species. So it'll only affect the mosquito larva. And so if your dog accidentally drink, I don't suggest chugging it, but if your dog accidentally drank out of it, which dogs eat gross stuff all the time, it won't harm him or her.
Yeah, and you can dump it out at the end of the month, and it's not gonna hurt anything.
No,
And then just start the whole process again.
So you said you got everything on Amazon, just to.
Yeah, I'm gonna send the links to Trina because she's better.
Yeah, and I can send it out to everybody easy.
I gotta make notes to myself, so I make sure.
So anything you send to me,
Okay.
So I have it in my list of things to order, or my order list, so it's super easy.
Yeah, neither.
For the Babewise console, do you recommend that we have a soil test done prior to?
That's helpful, but not necessary. It's helpful because then we can come in and maybe make recommendations on what we might apply or not apply to the soil. That might be a good thing to do in the meantime, but again, not necessary.
And the best way to get assistance in doing the soil testing would be how?
You can do it yourself. Here, I think I have instructions in here. I'll send this out to everybody, but this is the simple instructions. We do have soil probes at our office here in Houston. If you want to borrow them, we loan them out. That helps, but again, you can just get into the trowel or shovel. Yeah. And this, that's kind of the short route.
Send it.
Oh, no, you drop it off at our office, we send it to the soil lab. Yeah. And there's actually, you can do it yourself too, though. You can, either ship it yourself to University of Delaware, which has a really nice soil testing lab, or we send it to AgriLab just because they're the closest in proximity. But once you get your results back, you can call my office and talk to me, and I'm happy to walk you through it. Because sometimes the numbers don't make sense.
Yes, you're gonna, what does it mean, put this?
I can put that, I can send that out to everybody.
Yeah, if you make sure you send it to Trina as well, so she gets it in her hand.
Yeah, I can scan that stuff.
I'll just send. Now, are there any questions online? I don't want to forget about you guys. I want to make sure that you're involved with the conversation. Because I know we've been covering a lot of stuff today, and we are wrapping up. I think we're over time. I apologize. But I want to make sure if you guys have any questions, please please shout out.
Just include us on that email of what the summary you're sending out.
Absolutely.
Can we?
And of course, the handouts that we can't get, we don't have.
Yep, I will. I'll send it out to everybody.
The PowerPoint, would you be willing to share that?
Oh, yeah, if
Because
you
that would
wanna
be a
just
nice
drag it off, yeah.
feedback.
Trina might be sending it out, but we'll make sure that the list of everything gets out to you guys, okay?
If you, now Trina normally can get the video taken care of and she can send it out tonight.
I can hold off.
Oh,
Maybe till I get everything.
Yeah, so if you can work with her and let her know.
Oh, yeah.
You'll have all the handout till
If,
she'll send
if
it.
you're okay with waiting until tomorrow, I can send all that to them in the morning. Okay.
Yeah, excellent.
Well, thank you for, I know we went a little bit late, but that's okay. Next week, we will reconvene. We will see you back at 1 o'clock.
What is the wheat flowering? Is that?
Oh, I'm sorry, didn't we talk about this? So this is, arrowwood viburnum. It's a shrub. It's beautiful right now. Arrowwood. Yeah. And, so next week, we will talk about pollinators and wildlife. Feel free to bring your questions with you. Maybe we can go over our exercises that we're gonna, you don't have to do it, but if you wanna share your exercise with everybody, that's great.
And be sure and leave these cards.
Oh, yeah, and if the demographic cards I will say as well. Thank you. All right, everybody online, thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you.